They didn't have audio for video games or interactive media or multimedia. It was just bands recording and post-production. But after graduating from the Art Institute, I moved down to Los Angeles, got into the QA cycle, finally landed at Insomniac. And then while I was at Insomniac, they got into trouble where they decided leaks. So they went to the QA department and said, who here knows how to operate SoundForge? I raised my hand, and they said, follow us. And so, this is Jeff.
Hey, everybody, make some noise. For the record, I said that before everyone started clapping. So. My name's Jeff Domkowski. So I guess in my early 20s or so, mostly through music, just because I was in a situation where I was in a really bad band that had no money, but we really wanted to record. I mean, if it didn't sound great, you know what? We were a bad band anyway. Who cares? So after a couple of years of doing that, in the sound design and music mecca that is Wilmington, Delaware, and I was just using that to kind of pretty much give me freedom at night to do the recording thing. I was incredibly fortunate enough that somebody in our family knew somebody who ran this enough to bring me in, give me a tour of the place, and that was the first time that I ever was really exposed to any elements of post-production. Every single footstep and every single thing that a character touches, just to make it realistic, and it was fascinating to me as well. So I decided to go to school for it. I found the Vancouver Film School had a sound design program specifically for visual media, and it was a year-long program, about 10 months worth of film and hopes and dreams. So I went back to looking for another job in Manhattan for another year, also found nothing. But at the time that I was at Vancouver Film School, I managed to impress one of my classmates who had to take a chance on a guy with no experience, a bad demo reel, and a resume that talked about nothing but passion and how you start.
Yeah.
So I got over there and was immediately thrown into the fray of working on AAA titles, everything from voiceover editing, which they only let me do once because I was terrible at it. Then I got to get into some sound design work, started with ambience, sound design, to actual mixing and things to that effect. And that's where I ended up meeting everyone at Insomniac Games, audio director, and then a year later, they were hiring, so I signed up. I've been doing that ever since, for 4 years. That's ever since. But anyway, moving on to Mr. Dan Brzezinski.
Very fresh to start a couple weeks ago. Before that, background is actually also in music. I grew up in Poland. I spent 25 or 27 years living there. I basically went to music school since I was a player for a number of years. Also playing bands. That's how I met my wife at another horrible band. But that worked out really well. And then at some point, kind of decided to wanted to do something different and wanted to kind of get more education. I think I was just beginning to be a little bit bored with the scene, so through a friend of mine, I learned about this school in Boston, Berklee College of Music. And I was fortunate to be able to I got really interested in all things technology and sort of that aspect as majors. So also because of some medical issues, I basically decided that I kind of want to do sound design. And the program they had and computer music, a little bit of composing, some like instrument programming and those kind of things. So that I would, when I graduated, I came to LA, had a couple of meetings lined up, and one of them was with a composer who just was looking for an assistant. A friend of mine was like a lot of things in life. So yeah, I was able to, he said, yeah, you can, yeah, I need an assistant, but you have to start tomorrow. I said, of course, yes. And so I called my wife, said, I'm not, I actually got a job. I'm not coming back to Boston for a couple of weeks because we have to finish a film. So I did that for about 2 years, sort of running the studio, engineering sessions, doing some mixing, a little bit of writing, very little of writing. And then I just realized that it wasn't really it. I wanted to do more, focus more on sound design on that aspect. And another opportunity came up to join a studio that doesn't exist anymore, Seven Studios. They were just looking to, basically they were starting to build an audio team. I knew a few people there, and I got hired. And honestly, like I had no idea what I was doing in terms of like video game production and audio production for video games, to the point where they put me in this like little tiny office, and I kept breaking the game because I would do stereo files, because it didn't even occur to me that games can have, that there could be a mono file. So I ended up printing a big mono sign in front of my computer so I could remember, because I just kept breaking the game. But they didn't fire me, and then we got acquired by Activision. So I started working. I did one project with Activision, the Skylanders project, Skylanders game, and then we were laid off, and that's how I ended up at Sony, Sony Santa Monica as a senior sound designer. When I was there for about 8 years, doing a lot of projects. Recently, awesome God of War, and yeah, and then kind of I wanted to go back to being on a developer side, because what Sony is more about the product development, and we're kind of like a service group at Sony, and wanted to go back to be on the developer side. So I was lucky to be able to get back to that and to come back to Insomniac games, and there I am.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jerry Berlangieri, and I've been in game audio for about 25 years. I studied music in Ann Arbor. I'm from Detroit, studied music composition. And all my music compositions, I found early on that I was real interested in manipulation of audio. So my compositions at UM were always kind of weird. We would do a thing called the Composer's Forum every semester. And I always ended up doing stuff that was like for trumpets playing into fans, or banging on springs, or I did a piece with like scratch CDs. Right, we had 5 CD players with scratch CDs, and you hit it with a mallet, and we'd kind of move on to the next piece. So I was always real interested in kind of the sound designy side of composition, and also real into technology and sampling, and was doing sound design early on for some keyboard companies, and Sonic was an American keyboard company at the time, and I was doing work with them, and sampling early on as samplers started to become more recorders. It really started to kind of bring out the skills of building instruments, and so right out of school, I got a gig locally at a studio that was doing what were called animated storybooks for Disney Interactive. So I started doing sound design there, largely because it was difficult to find audio professionals that were also comfortable editing on the computer and comfortable living in both those worlds. So got that gig and learned a lot really fast. The Disney stuff was a train of products, from Winnie the Pooh to Lion King to Pocahontas, all their titles basically. We were turning into multimedia titles, which were basically like pop-up books for kids, but on the computer. I did that for a number of years, and then moved also local to a studio called Parallax. It was doing a video game called Descent, which was kind of a 6 Degrees of Freedom shooter. And that was kind of my first real video game. And that was sort of the era in video games where joining a company was kind of like joining a band, because there was 12 of us. I played in bands too. We played in some crappy bands. That's kind of the rite of passage. Yeah, that's the theme. Which was really fun, because at that time, being the only audio person, you did everything. So I wrote the score, I did all the sound effects, did a lot of the scripting to get the sounds into the game, and we all hung out and made the game. We'd work on the game all day, and then we'd go and drink some beer, and we'd come back and we'd play Quake or Ratchet and Clank, and then we'd just bang out the game. And eventually, studio grew, and we were independent. We got purchased by THQ. We did a series of games With them, split into two companies, Red Faction at Volition, which was our sister company in Chicago, and at a game called Alter Echo, which is a lot of fun. And then, as often happens with studio acquisitions, the publisher will kind of go a different route, and there was a round of studio closures, and ours was one of them. And so headed out west to Activision, where I joined the team at Treyarch, who at the time were, Treyarch was kind of the Spider-Man company. We were doing Spider-Man over there. Jumped on board to work on Spidey, and then eventually we picked up Call of Duty and worked on several Call of Duties there, Call of Duty 3 and World at War and a couple of Black Ops games. And that was a lot of fun. Working on the Call of Duty game was, again, sort of, there was a lot of recording, a lot of field recording, which is part of it that I always enjoyed, going out into the field and recording the weapons that we use in the game and setting up those sessions and going out to the desert and firing stuff off and bringing it into the studio and editing it. Much bigger team. That when I joined Treyarch, we were 3. By the time I left Treyarch, there was 15. And we grew and had multiple projects, and the studio grew. And eventually, Call of Duty is largely what Treyarch does now. Then I moved over to Activision headquarters, which was just adjacent to Treyarch, in what was called the central media role. Since Activision owned a lot of studios, they decided to sort of have a central resource that could help all the individual studios. Because what often happens, audio teams are small, and the audio team handles everything on a game, and there's a lot of bottlenecks. So towards the end of a project, there's a lot of support to try and grow the team and add resources so that the games can ship. So while I was at Central, it was great because I got to fly around and work with a lot of different teams. I was out in the UK working with a studio called Bizarre Creations on their racing games. I was down working on the Transformers games in San Diego, Carlsbad. I got to work on the Guitar Hero and DJ Hero games. So it was great coming off lots of Call of Duty games. I got to kind of change the palette and work on a lot of different games and also see how all the different studios were doing things, which is great as an audio person as well, because different audio designers have different techniques, different ways of doing things. And so it was great to kind of drop in and pick up tips and learn from different designers on how they were doing things. So then I moved up to Microsoft. So I was here in LA for 8-9 years working at Activision over on the West Side. As Microsoft was getting ready to launch their next gen title at the time, the Xbox One, there was an opportunity. They also had a central media team, and it was a great opportunity to go up to Microsoft during the generation of a console and kind of see how Microsoft did things. So I went up to Seattle and worked there at Microsoft for a number of years, where I worked alongside Jeff D up there at Microsoft, and I worked with Dan over at Activision. So another common thread is that the industry, we all work together at some point. So I did Microsoft for a number of years, and then there was another similar kind of opportunity with Take-Two Interactive out in New England to help them get a new studio off the ground and kind of work on some unannounced titles that are still in works, and worked there for a number of years. And then the opportunity to come back to Insomniac, which was fun for me because back in the days when I got started working on Descent, the original Ratchet and Clank and Insomniac has been around about as long as I have, which is unique in the video game industry because studios kind of rise and fall as the projects come and go. And so it's great to be in this classic studio that I kind of always wanted to be. And I served there as audio lead.
My name is Adam Hochstetter, and I feel like I'm kind of the oddball in this group of gentlemen. I'm a freelance composer, so I don't deal with any sound design or dialogue or anything. I just write music. That's primarily what I do. I also do what's called MIDI orchestration, which is taking scores and making them sound like a real orchestra with just computers. And then I do arranging and all that kind of stuff too. I got my start. I work for John Paisano right now, kind of under him as an additional writer, but I also do freelance work of my own, some of my own personal projects. I went to school at USC at the film scoring program. It's a graduate program, scoring for motion pictures is what they called it when I went there. I think it's got a different title now. I graduated in 2010. I'm originally from Fargo, North Dakota, so it was a big jump for me. I knew I wanted to do music since I was in high school. So I had this film scoring dream since I was probably 16 and just kind of went for it. I went to Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, and got my bachelor's of music in theory and composition, and then went to USC, like I said, and then just freelanced and tried to make it as a composer for about 7 years. I did all sorts of things. I taught piano lessons. I tried to join a band as a keyboard player. I mean, I did like everything to make ends meet except do the day job. I refused to do the Starbucks thing or whatever. Not just because I knew that, you know, I wanted to do music and get all of the music that I could, you know, get done within those 7 years or whatever until I found John Paisano, or actually until he found me. While I was working, there's something called sample libraries. I don't know if any of you are composers or deal with sample libraries, but there are companies that make sample libraries. Spitfire Audio is one, Cinesamples is one, and they have these demos for their products. And I used to write demos for those companies, kind of showcasing their products. That they come out with a piano library that's all virtual in the computer, and then they need a demo to showcase this piano library. So I would write a demo for them, and eventually that's how I got working with John. Is he found me through a sample library demo that I had written for a company called Orchestral Tools. So it's just kind of, you never really know how you're going to be found, and so I've worked on several things with him. He kind of helped me break into the industry. Like I said, I was doing lots of other different things before I met John. And so now we've worked on Detroit Become Human, which is a Quantic Dream game. I worked on Spider-Man with John, which is kind of how I'm connected with these gentlemen. We've worked on The Maze Runner, The Death Cure, the last one, and Marvel's Daredevil, a bunch of other things. But yeah, my job story is kind of small because I haven't been in the industry that long, and I just kind of hit my stride about 3 years ago.
But were you in a crappy band?
I'm sorry?
Were you ever in a crappy band?
I was not. We went to one rehearsal, and I had to pay for the space somehow, and then I never heard from him again.
That counts.
Well, obviously,
That
if
counts. That qualifies.
It was so bad. I mean, we met at Shakey's Pizza for a band meeting. And
That
we didn't even
counts.
get alcohol.
That counts.
I mean, it was,
Super
dude,
crappy.
that was like, something needed to change.
Clearly, if we were
Thankfully,
in
it
good
did.
bands, we wouldn't be here.
What's that?
If we were in good bands, we wouldn't be probably sitting
That's
here.
right. Yeah, thank God we weren't, because now we're here. And so I'm sure I'm leaving things out, but I'll leave it for the Q&A. I don't want to ramble too long.
Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick. I'm the dialogue guy on stage here. I'm currently the senior dialogue coordinator at Insomniac Games. I, too, am relatively new to the company. 18 years now I've been doing this since I graduated recording school. Was in a crappy band, went to recording school because I wanted to do music. Quickly realized that the way to make a living, best way to make a living, doing audio is post, and got a gig at a post studio doing tons and tons in Detroit. So I was doing tons and tons of automotive, lots and lots of VO. The cool thing was that at 6 o'clock, everybody went home and friends up, and we could make a bunch of noise in there. Followed a woman to Canada, found another post studio, worked there for a while, started to record video game VO, which was totally new to me and totally like outside of my. Ended up working on Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3, Dragon Age game. For BioWare as a contractor, they hired me on full-time as a dialogue editor, worked on Dragon Age Inquisition, went to a couple other places, went over to Stockholm, Sweden, worked on a Star Wars game, Battlefront, Mirror's Edge, came back to Canada, Mass Effect Andromeda, Anthem, and here I am in California. Thank you.
See if I. Thank you to all of you. They have a really great and varied background, but you can hear a lot of the common themes of how they developed their careers. I'm going to turn over to Herschel, who has some material he'd like to share and talk a little bit about sound design and what goes into the process for games.
Cool. So since we're coming into this one, we don't know quite how much experience some of you guys have with game audio or how we do it, because a lot of people come into it and they just do post-production. A lot of the schools that are around here are based around post-production, film, recording, that kind of stuff, and it's not a lot of interactive. So I have a slide, basically just a basic run over, run of the mill of just a lot of the basics of the stuff that we do from just, yeah, as sound designers. Because the thing that's interesting about sound design in video games is you are basically a catch-all. We are the only department that also combined with visual effects that touches every system in the engine. So we work with the visual effects people, we put sounds on visual effects. We go into the animation editors and we place sounds on the animation timelines. Nope. So this is a screenshot of our animation editor. Funny enough, yeah, we do animate concrete. So the concrete does some stuff, and there's the gameplay script to tell it what to do. So at this moment, gameplay will say, do your thing. And then along the lines, these three green tabs at the top are sounds that trigger along with it. So you can see, we can play sounds along with the animation of what happens. And sorry, this isn't, I know the concrete's not super exciting, but we're not allowed to show some of the proprietary stuff because that's copywritten. So concrete was the thing I had to find real quick on the fly. But we do put sounds to some more exciting things than concrete. So the thing is also when you're working as a sound designer, you work in the level editor. So the level editor is where our designers most of the time live. They build the world in that area, and they put things like concrete, buildings, lampposts, cars, that kind of stuff within the world to populate it. And then we go in and we fill it with sound volumes or sound emitters. So our sound volume system controls our reverb most of the time. So when you enter in a large square, you now have reverb, and then we can also play in environmental sounds like birds, wind, and just normal ambience. So back in the day, we used to do it by hand, and it looks a bit like that. So you have a whole bunch of blue blocks, which are the small pocketed ones, and then the big ones around the outside are the overall thing. So the small ones would be like small alleyways, coffee shops, that kind of thing, and then the big one is just like outside city street. And then depending on where you are, it changes. But we made a game not too long ago for Spider-Man, and we needed a lot more because we were doing an entire city. So we got a little system that we made it so that we could automate it, and that is a city block. So you can see we upped our volume count by a bunch. So we have systems that operate in that kind of realm so that we can get that stuff. But you can see we used to do all that by hand, but when the game started getting bigger, we had to adapt with it. Here's another screenshot of, so that's one block. Here's the city. Whoa, was that me? All right. Okay. So that's the city, whole bunch of volumes, more squares. And what's this one? This is the city from the top down, and that outside was water, because then we found out we had an ocean side, so we had to make it so that sounds traveled around on the outside, so you had water too. So it's kind of neat. And then there was the animation editor, and here is after that, there's other systems like our scripting system. So this is where gameplay lives, basically. Not gameplay, well, it's actually gameplay programmers and designers live. So what they do in this system is they trigger items off of characters to make it so, say you fire a gun, there will be a weapon fired event, and we have to react to that. So we play weapon fired off of that, and this is what that system looks like. So actually, the thing is, this one's the music scripting system as well. So we go through this bit of mayhem, and each one of those is a call for a different section of the world and a different character, and then we trigger sounds off of that. And then for the last bit, we have, for at least at our company, there's a bunch of different audio interfaces that we use to get sounds into the game for integration. There's like Fmod, or Sony uses one called Scream, and we use one that's called Wise. And in Wise, we have to react to multiple different layers of things. And this is another thing that differs from regular post-production and audio post in video games, is when you have a character that is, for this demonstration, it's just a punch. We're just gonna hit a guy in the face. And in a movie, you record the sound of the guy getting hit in the face, sync it up, and then mix it, and you're good. But for us, we actually have to, I gotta make this one bigger. There we go. So we have an entire system built around that. So you can see here, we have the enemy combat mixer. So that's the little miniature mixer that will, it handles our mix. And then these are our switches. So as you go down, we have to detect what we hit. So was he wearing armor? And so it's a neutral hit, armor. This one is, after it goes down in the tree, sorry. So it's neutral, armor, default, and then it goes into the next switch of what did I hit him with? So I hit him with, a regular punch. Was he in the air or was he standing on the ground? And then we go into, where did I punch him? In the head, or in the leg, or the torso? And then within each of these switches, we have a random container, which has 13 different variations of punches. Because if you start spamming the button, it gets really boring if it's the same punch every time. So we have to account for that. But the thing is, even within that system, we have, close, this little guy. Oops, sorry. Enlarge that. And this is within the random container. So it's telling us don't repeat any of them until you get past 11. So play 11 different random ones, then you can start repeating other ones. And then this is actually the randomizer that's attached to the pitch variation. So it can, when you play the sound, it can go 50 cents below its normal pitch or 25 cents above its normal pitch at random. So even though we only have, or not only, but yeah, even though we only have 13 to 15 punches, it will vary the pitch for us, so it makes it sound different every time. And there's also a low pass filter that we can act, or a high pass filter, so we can get more, low end, high end, thumb, crunch, that kind of stuff. And then, so seeing some of that switching system, we had a game where you could change your clothes at any time. So you could wear leather pants, you could wear jeans, you could wear jeggings, you could wear yoga outfit, tutu, whichever. And we had to account for that. So within those switches for us, we had multiple movements for your legs, shoes, shirt, and this is, oh no. I don't think it likes it. Well, shoot, can't watch that one. Is there another? I'm trying to open.
Oh, Windows Media, yeah, it's a Mac.
Oh, okay.
We also do a lot of troubleshooting.
Yeah, that's another thing.
This is actually most of our day.
Well, oh, you have a PC here? Oh, that would be dope.
As they're switching, I just wanted to add to it, just to maybe clarify for you guys. I mean, what Herschel is talking about, which is kind of the sort of the second step of our work. We still do sound production because as of like any other production, we still do stuff on Pro Tools, designing sounds or cinematics or individual sounds, and that's kind of that's maybe 50% of our work. And then the sort of the more technical aspect is what Herschel is talking about. And to me, actually, this is kind of what drew me to that line of work, is that combination of creative, creativity that you can put into creating sounds and doing recordings using synthesizers, different sources, and using sound libraries, and the mix of them, and then then figuring out how they're gonna actually exist in a game. To me, it's kind of like a puzzle, and to me, it's a very exciting thing. And kind of like what Herschel was showing with the tools, it's it depends on the studio. There are different tools, different middleware, but it's sort of they're just want you to understand there's those two sort of not as separate processes, but kind of one follows the other. Make sense?
Yeah, Jeff and I we work together a lot. And one of the things that we talk about, we go to each other a lot to try to figure out how to get something into the game, because a lot of the times they'll have something that we've never done before, or it's just something that we've never seen before. And then we have to try to spitball just ideas of how to get sound to trigger off of something, in the ways that we know. And it's usually like hacking stuff in using code and a bunch of those different tools. So that's a big part of our job as well. And then again, like Daniel was saying, it also breaks a lot, like every day. And then we have to go in and fix it to figure out how to unbreak it, but make it still play again. So that's always fun.
It is a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
When we talk a lot, we're not just sitting in the studio and recording, and so there's a lot of interaction.
Oh, I guess we can't get that PC.
So,
All right.
yes, we don't have the right adapter.
Okay, so half of my movies will work then, but not all of them. So we can't show the switching system. That's fine. Let's open this back again. So this is also kind of on the switching system. This one is for our material sets. So we also have to account for when we're recording Foley and getting stuff for their foot fells. Everybody loves foot fells. We have to also record on every material type. So, oh please. What? It's an AVI file. Nope.
Is the VLC on there? Do a right click to try to prevent it? Or does it give you as an option for open?
Wait. Nope.
RX5 will work.
Nope. That's all right. Well, well,
I just want to apologize that Herschel can't play his material because it's from Windows and we're on a Mac, but he can talk a little bit more about the process. And
Game development happens on PC.
that's,
I grew up with Macs, and it was a it was a bit of a transition to get on PC.
Disciplines all working together, and a large part of what we do is figuring out why something isn't working or why something stopped working, and staring at a screen and trying to turn it back on again. So this is very much par for the course.
Well, because there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of, people that touch the same assets, and concept artists, visual effects people, scripters, you name it. So there's a lot of potential for things to break, and they break all the time. So,
And the systems are pretty complex. I mean, we've got, as big games teams have gotten larger, we've specialized in different areas, and there are technical sound designers that just focus on the actual implementation. So that there's the recording and editing of the sounds and crafting what is essentially an instrument. If we're doing an impact or on an object, we record thinking in terms of different velocities that it's hit, or what the behavior is like when it rolls in the ground, or in different things. What does a heavy object made of wood sound like when it falls on the carpet? And to try and create that real interaction, we're mimicking a system, a physics system. And so there are, on bigger teams, technical sound designers that part of it is a lot like playing. To me, it's gotten easier because there are engines that make it fun. It's if any of you have played a game like Minecraft, where the kids are playing this game now, and you're creating worlds with logic that do certain things, and that is very much what we do, is create a world and try and connect the behaviors to something that is immersive as the player is going through there. And so even though it's a challenge sometimes to kind of break through and get something working or working properly, it's actually pretty rewarding. I actually started moving into audio programming while I was at Treyarch, because so much of what we do is technical troubleshooting. And I found that and actually many composers find, I think, that there's, because it's like crafting a song where you've got to make decisions about, understanding theory and kind of knowing where you want things to go.
Yeah.
Programming is kind of a lot like that, and creating a puzzle that's going to solve a particular problem. So there's definitely a comfort with technology and with like troubleshooting in that world that is kind of inherent to what we do.
And just to follow up on when you were saying about how when we're thinking of sound and thinking of how to create hitting something else, what we also need to think about is how we're going to break those into certain elements and layers, because it's usually not just the sound that goes on that's put in the game. There's things that are like looping sounds that have beginnings and ends that need to be separated from the actual loop. So there's a lot of layering, and then kind of how the game is constructed and scripted will also help us determine and make a decision on how we're going to break the sound into smaller parts. Then they're put together in through middleware back to the to the game.
I was going to say, are you ready to go?
Keep going.
Okay, cool. I was going to say, what you were saying about, things have to loop, and then there's kind of like one shots and there's layers to the audio. It's the same way with music, whereas when we write tracks for video games specifically, most of the music or the gameplay is non-linear. So it's, like in Spider-Man, for example, you can swing around the city for 20 hours and not do anything else, But how do you make that not boring, in sound and music? So when we're writing tracks for games like that, we have to write these loops. So we'll write like a 3-minute loop that will have to stay at a certain energy level so that you don't feel a rise and a fall when you're playing, because otherwise it'd be like, oh, this is kind of exciting. Oh, it's really exciting, and then it's not so exciting anymore. And then it's really exciting again, and that goes on for 4 hours or however long you play. So it's looping tracks that don't become boring after 4 hours of gameplay. And what's interesting is when we do recordings for video games, we have something where we call striping, which they do this in film too, but they really do it in video games because you want a lot more control in video games than film, because film is just, you know, you watch it and then it's over. So when we go and record, if it's a full orchestra and a bunch of synth elements or pulses or drums and all that kind of stuff, we'll record it in the computer. We'll do what we call a mock-up. It'll be, you know, for approval, it'll get sent to the director and he'll go, cool, great, stem it out. So when I say stem it out, we'll take almost every single element in that track and we'll put it on its own audio wave file. So I think in our stemming process, we have like 64 stems. So you'll have flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, bass clarinets, low woodwinds, trumpets, and, you know, violin long, violin short, viola long, viola short, and like round and round we go all the way through the bottom. And when you record with the orchestra, you'll do the same thing. They'll just record violin shorts, and then they'll record violin long, and then woodwind shorts, woodwind long, and we'll go record everything separate instead of recording in a big room. A lot of times you'll see in films when they're recording an orchestra, they'll have everybody in the same room and there'll be the conductor up there and it'll be playing this suite or whatever is being recorded. Video games are usually not done that way because when they have to loop it for 4 hours, what they'll do is they'll take elements from that piece of music and they'll kind of make like a 4-hour long suite by muting certain things here and there. So you might hear a track and be like, wow, that's like an amazing 12-minute track, but really it was only 3 minutes when we wrote it, and they're just muting things as they go. And I think the engine does that. I don't know anything about the engines, I just know the music side of it. But yeah, it goes through and says, you know, no strings here, no woodwinds here,
Yeah,
bring the strings back in.
If you're familiar with working with programs like Ableton Live, I mean, that's sort of what we're going for in order to stretch 60 minutes of music into something that can work over a longer experience. Is imagine, you know, with Ableton Live where you can mix and match loops and you can drop different things in and out of each track on the fly. It's kind of what we set the game up to do for us based on certain conditions. We know that this is an idle moment where the layers can drop out, but now you're in combat, so we can bring in different layers. So that's the ultimate goal, is to have something that is responsive like that so we can react to what the player is doing. And in order to do that, we need the music broken out into pieces like that so that we can have that kind of control.
So, you know, sound is broken out into the same area, the same idea for things like ambiances. When we would have a bed that's just like a room tone, and then construct the ambience when you're, let's say, in a city from those individual elements that then they play randomly from different locations or from different, you know, emitters. So it's not, so as you're playing and you put the controller down and you're listening to environment, you don't want to be hearing the same, you know, car horn, you know, after another car horn that's just repeats every 2 minutes. You want to be able to, you know, change that up a little bit. So we have those elements that we can then trigger randomly. And that's kind of how we construct it, which is very similar to what Adam was saying.
And I do have a demonstration of that music system actually working on a video, but it's in this little folder at the bottom. You can see music systems, but I'm not allowed to show that because we'll get into a lot of trouble. So like after, if you guys are really interested in it, you can come by and we can actually play it off of the laptop offline and you can see it because it's pretty neat. So here's the thing that I was talking about with all the materials of clothing for a person when we were doing Foley. This was actually recorded by Jeff back in the day. It's pretty cool. Can we turn that up? Can you guys hear that? All right, I'm gonna rewind that. And that's up all the way. No? Do you guys hear any footsteps and stuff in there? Oh, is it?
Sound up all the way?
It's just coming from the laptop.
Yeah. Okay. No? It's even quieter now. Should we try a different video? Wait, sorry, that's the wrong one. Let me drag it into the player. Anything? No?
We can try it. It'll at least give some sound virtual.
Okay. Again, game design, troubleshooting thing.
And improvising.
Yeah.
While we're waiting, I just want to make one other point is,
Yep.
all of these things that we talk about, about breaking things apart and putting them together, I think you can maybe relate to that is the overall goal we're after is, to make an, entertainment and, experience that is, in some way similar to, watching movies, but we have to kind of deconstruct that and then put it back together in the engine. So that, that kind of creates that extra layer of work. But a lot of games are going after this, cinematic feel and cinematic sound. So that's kind of the goal we're after.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so we're gonna try a super hack fix. I'm gonna hold the mic up to the computer speaker. This is legit.
Yes. You're MacGyver in this right now.
In true form. All right, here we go.
Speakers either, okay.
I can hear something. It's actually coming out of the HDMI port because I can hear it from a monitor, but it's not coming out of the computer. So, sorry.
It might be. Is there a speaker on the projector?
Yeah.
Is that what it's coming out of?
Yeah. Wait, should we? Can we plug this back in? It might work now.
It's just super tiny.
No?
All right, that's on the plug there. See if it comes out of the laptop.
All right, let's see if I play again. And play again.
Okay.
Okay, now we're doing the mic thing.
So we use a lot of those test levels where we focus on just one element in isolation. It helps a lot to just kind of troubleshoot and figure out if there are any problems, if, in this case, we have proper footsteps.
And to kind of tie everything together that we've set up here about, the variations that go into things, the way that we kind of keep recording different layers of sounds. As Dan was saying earlier, it is very much to try to give that film experience in a setting where the player can do whatever they want. I always describe video games as it's a cartoon you can run around in, because if you're doing post on a cartoon, you start with nothing. There's no ambience, there's no references for, let's say, a character's footsteps as they're walking through mud or through grass. And whereas if you were doing that in post, you'd bring in a Foley artist to, let's say, do whatever footsteps. Okay, he's walking on concrete there. Okay, put on some shoes, walk on some concrete, record it. There, that part's done. Oh no, now he's on mud. Then you do the same thing with, a mud pit or something. We kind of have to take all of those different surfaces that a player could possibly walk on in our world, in, like, let's say for Spider-Man, all of Manhattan, and we try to give it that, oh, we just had somebody record this as if they were doing it live feel to, let's say, a player deciding to run across a park versus sneak across like a metal grated floor. And that's what you saw up here with all of those different surfaces that Herschel's character was running on, metal thin, grass, and stuff like that.
How many do we have? How many surfaces?
About 40. So what that means is pretty much every time you have your character walking on any surface, in any way that they could be walking, be it running, be it landing after they jump, be it kind of sneaking, we have to go through and figure, okay, so a player could sneak through this one part where they could walk on that many footstep surfaces. They could run through that part and have to get sounds for all of that. So as opposed to just kind of one recording session, we end up doing, let's see, if we had 4 different footstep types and 40 different surfaces, we're looking at 100, who's good at math? 160?
A lot.
160
Many.
individual
We're sound
combinations
designers.
of types of footsteps and types of surfaces. And that's the sort of world that we try to create through the layering system that Dan was talking about, where you pretty much at all times feel like your player, your character is connected to this world because you're hearing it as if you were watching a film. So that's I guess a much broader definition of, or explanation of kind of how we drill down from how do we get that film atmosphere through every single one of those layers. And what we were talking about with the combat impacts as well, as Herschel was talking about punching people in the face, whether you're in the air, whether you're on the ground. If you're watching an action movie and guy jumps down and punches a ninja in the face and runs off. On the sound effect side, you're able to edit that one punch, make it sound as cool as it possibly can, and then run him off screen. Whereas in one of our games, you can punch anybody in the face. So you have to take into account things like you were saying, oh, is he wearing a helmet? Okay, maybe we need a separate sound that we can trigger during gameplay.
Did he
to
block?
Make that hit in the head, but wearing a helmet sound versus if he's wearing a hockey mask, which is also a helmet. I don't know why he's a hockey mask. But so there are different layers and different things that we build into stuff like that.
It's a simulation.
That system.
Yeah, it's a
level
simulation,
of
and the more we can make it feel real, the more you're kind of immersed in the experience. And it's a lot of fun to do. It sounds like a lot of busy work, and it is, attaching materials to all these, different settings. And we it isn't even just footsteps. When we were doing rain in Black Ops, we actually recorded raindrops on multitude of surfaces. So no matter what the player was huddling behind, there was sort of a realism that came through. And it's incredibly satisfying and a lot of fun as recordists to find those sounds. And as audio professionals, we're sort of there to kind of babysit that sound or shepherd it all the way from whatever the original source is. And sometimes we go out in the field and we record it. And then to edit it down to all variations needed, the multiple velocities needed to make sure that we're accounting for all these different behaviors in the game. And, and so there's the realism, there's that stuff that we do. But then often there's the really fun, straightforward sound design-y stuff too, of like, superheroes or explosions or spaceships and lasers. So there's that side of it too, which is just straight on really unique sounds that are fun to do. But it's often these things like the footsteps that really are the really subtle sounds we spend a lot of time on, because that's really what gives the player a real sense of really being in that world. And there's a lot of it to cover to kind of create that simulation.
Another difference is, in a movie, you have punching someone in the face, you know exactly how many times, so you can record, 3-4 times, 3-4 variations. In our cases, the player can be, punching somebody in the face for 4 hours. So we need to make sure that the variations, there's enough variation in the sound so it doesn't feel repetitive. Our ear is very, very sensitive to repetitive sounds and will detect it right away if just like there's maybe, 2-3 sounds.
Right. And then, but if you manage to punch somebody in the face for several times in a row, there's also the layer of us as designers deciding how to reward the player for the fact that they've managed to punch someone in the face several times. So that's where the sort of the design aspects of sending those messages to the player that this is a positive thing. You've managed to pull off a combo. And that's where we move from sort of the realism of variations to the sort of the surrealism of adding a certain layer to make it feel supercharged or like you've done something that is a reward. And so it's a combination of the natural and sort of the super hyper natural.
And how we balance that depends basically on the style of the game. Certain games are more realistic. Certain games allow for more stylized sound design. And then so we kind of have to work with the game director, with the design director, and kind of make sure that we're kind of in line with their vision as well.
Sometimes we'll get asked to do that too. Like I know I think in Spider-Man actually, if you do like a certain combo, you'll get like a reward, or you'll gain health back or something like that. And then we'll get asked, along with the sound design of like whatever it does, we'll have some sort of fanfare or some sort of stinger that goes on that is like achievement unlocked, like kind of what you're saying. But the interesting thing is we have to write those stingers based on what they're doing in the game so that it's in the same key and the same tempo. So we'll get asked to do things like I was saying, looping. We'll have a 3-minute loop or whatever, but then we'll say, oh, hey, we need 10 stingers for this. So we'll need it to be in the same key so that it can be triggered on any downbeat. If this has been unlocked, either the character fails or the character succeeds. So we'll do 5 that are bad, like, oh, Spider-Man's dead, or, oh, like you've gotten hit in something, you've lost something. Or we'll get, hey, you've got a combo, that's great, or you saved somebody, or you found a hidden item, or whatever. And so we'll have to make these little runs or hits, and it's kind of cool to see that paired with sound design, because we get to come together as a team in that way to make something very specific. So.
I mean, I think because we're talking about sound design and music, the dialogue has a similar approach for some of the dialogue, right? For variations and yeah.
Yeah, when you're getting hit in the face, you don't make the same noise. So we do like 15 variations of getting hit in the face. That's a fun one. Electrocution, covered in spiders. It's a really fine line between taking a punch to the gut and sounding like you're pooping. Something we have to watch for in the studio. But yeah. Herschel? Oh, still.
Back to Herschel.
So yeah, here's another one of, again, like they were talking about for this one, it's still raw on footsteps. Again, sometimes for us, this was interesting for us because most of the time when we ran on surfaces, like you saw in that test level, they're on the ground. And in Sunset's case, this one was not. Or water. Uh-oh. It's not on. Or for in this case, we also had a lot of interactable in our game. Basically, we in Sunset, you didn't want to touch the ground, which was weird because we recorded a whole bunch of footsteps for the ground. But so one of the major modes of transportation was grinding and bouncing. So we also had to record a bunch of surfaces for what it would sound like if you jumped off of stuff, random stuff that you normally wouldn't jump off of because it's impossible. So yeah, these are some of those. Oh man. So yeah, there's that. And then let's see if we can get. Oh wait, sorry. Uh-oh. So that was for mostly like interacting with the environment and stuff like that. And then one of the things that's also interesting is depending on the studio that you're working at. Like Insomniac, we're actually not small anymore, but we're an independent company. So our sound team is unique is that we're actually larger than most others. And because, well, okay, take that back. If you have a publisher, they have a huge team because they have sound people that are working on multiple different games at the same time. We're usually working on one, and then we're all working together to, collaboratively to work to finish something up. So when we're being an independent company, we actually work from start to finish. So we do post-production, normal production, and pre-production. So we actually stay with the project the entire time. If you're working with a publisher, usually you only come on at the end, and then you do all the sounds within like the last 6 months or last year. As for like working on Spider-Man or working on Sunset Overdrive, I worked on Spider-Man for 4 years. So it's 4 years, one project the whole time. And then other people come on, as we need them for contractors, and then they leave. But in Insomniac's case, we try to keep as much of it in-house as possible. So, but through that, since we're able to work in the post-production realm, or pre-production realm, we actually get to help develop a lot of the aspects of the game, like the weapons. So is there a... Is that? Nope, that's Patrick's. There we go. Is it? Nope. So in our, oh, here we go. So in our game, Sunset, we had a grenade launcher, and we prototyped it. It was a tube. It shot out a little, miniature pineapple, and we spitballed with some of the designers, and someone said, "Wouldn't it be cool if you shot something else?" And someone said, "Like what?" And then someone said, "Stuffed animals." And as soon as they said stuffed animal, the audio team immediately said, "What if it was a teddy bear? What if it was like a Teddy Ruxpin? What if it talked? What?" And then it immediately became all these different things. What if it became a sticky bomb and it grabbed onto you because it had like, the action grip and it was gonna hug you. And then we ended up creating this little monstrosity, which I absolutely love. This is the TN Teddy, by the way. So yeah, he told you a story before he blew up. It was cool. But then we also get to create other things, like we wanted a gun that shot saw blades, and someone said that wasn't cool enough. So we ended up creating this, and we called this one the vinyl gun. So we get to add to the attitude of the game just by switching up the sounds of some of the weapons, because it's not a saw blade gun. It plays fire. It fires vinyl records. And then we also get to collaborate with our writing team to do dialogue. So for Sunset, we were able to actually come in and sit together as a group. We made like a little like scrum sort of pit, and then we just started spitballing ideas. And we said, in this world, it's post-apocalyptic, but it's run by major corporations. What if the corporations were completely unscrupulous? They didn't care, and their advertising was just the worst. So we came up with a couple of those ads, and then we recorded them ourselves, and then then we made them real and put them in the game. So these are a couple of those advertisements. It's just audio, no video.
Don't let a day go by without our little blue box to give to your wife, girlfriend, or both. We won't tell. As long as you buy something for everyone. We won't give you a guilt trip because you do love her.
Could you guys hear that? All right, just making sure. And then we were able to take those advertisements and then put them on an ad wall throughout our test levels to check them out to see how they worked with interacted in the real world. And then we'll do the same thing in this. Oh wait, did I close VLC again? There it is. Cool.
Ice cream, cold to the touch. We know you're staring at aisles of medical, so we can view that to regulated perfection. Replace yours and purchase a new one today. Hey, DIY BBQ. If you burn your food, hey, it's your own.
Yeah, and then lastly, like we were saying, building the game is a lot like making a puzzle. So a lot of the times we come up with certain situations that we've never dealt with before. In Sunset, it was the very first time we've actually had a game where they were asking us to have over 100 enemies on screen attacking us. And the thing is, the video game can only handle a certain amount of channels. After a certain amount, it just becomes garbled, and then it doesn't leave you any available channels to, use your guns, shoot stuff, hear anything in the environment. So we came up with a cheat system here, and this is a quick demo of that. It's just, it was a way of problem solving, and so we were able to get away with putting 100, or in this demo, 50 enemies on screen, and we only used 8 channels. So you would hear the 7 closest always. And that's just normal everyday problem solving in audio for games. Yeah. So, and in between that, I mean, hopefully there's a bunch of other talking points and stuff like that, but back to the floor.
Thank you so much, Herschel. I can ask some questions, but I think that, we're running to the point where Jared's going to bring the mic up and see if we have something to walk around with.
Yeah, we do. Here we go.
Okay.
Yeah, so what a great panel, and we did a great audio presentation on that. It's our first run here, so I'm not going to walk in front of the speakers exactly, but I have a lot of questions, but I'm sure everybody in the audience here too does. One thing I'd love to hear about at some point is your frustration. The ideal mostly on the music and stemming for Activision on the rock band leaders, but I know the frustration and the feedback. I'm coming from a young director or producer, and you guys have a somebody says, I need it green, it needs to sound green, I need it, you know, do you want to talk a little bit about those moments in your life?
So it's interesting that you say frustration, because I find that my frustration comes with directors that try to be too technical. They try to speak in composer speak instead of speaking in director speak. And it becomes super frustrating because it's like, I want you to tell me this needs to feel blue, or this needs to feel like, oh, like you've lost your cat, you know? And I don't want you to say like, yeah, I think the strings could be a little more sostenuto there, and the flute could come. I don't know if I like the flute, maybe up the octave. It's like, I like the challenge of being able to figure out the puzzle of what the director wants instead of being so directed that it puts me in a teeny tiny box. I like having a bigger box. So my frustration usually comes with a director that tries to be too musical instead of directorial. I don't know how you'd say that, but yeah, they try to get too specific. I'd rather be able to interpret and digest it and then spit it out. And if I don't get it right, no problem. Give me another note, give me another pass. Then it's my fault that I didn't, understand what you were trying to say.
Totally agree. We go through the same thing. We want a director or designer to come and talk to us in terms of what they want to hear, or of what they're trying to communicate, or of what kind of emotion they're trying to communicate, or is it supposed to be a rewarding moment? Is it supposed to be are you supposed to be steering the player to a certain area? And let us figure out how to do that. Don't tell us can you bring up the the footsteps 3 dB up? That's kind of not really helpful. But my experience has been pretty actually good. As far as speaking of frustrations, a lot of times for us is doing the same work over and over, which happens quite a bit because of all the moving parts and so many people. Insomniac right now is what, like 260 people or something about that. If you have 200 people just touching the same code or the same scripts, something's going to go wrong and things will just get deleted. So for me, a lot of frustration comes when when you have to redo your work basically, and unfortunately that's sometimes unavoidable. So we try to work the systems and with programmers and designers to kind of minimize that, but it can be frustrating when you work on something and you come back 2 months later and it's just not there.
There's always technical frustrations with tech that might not be able to create a sound experience that's quite what you're looking for. So for an example, a very expensive process is occlusion obstruction, just getting a sound to sound normal in the game. And that's something that takes a cooperation. It's very expensive, and all the departments are sort of sharing CPU bandwidth. So on the audio side, sometimes when we're going after something, a very complex system like that, it can be a challenge to get the right support, the right commitment, or even the tech. For many years, it just wasn't possible to do that. And these days, it's also sort of on the technology side. Audio programmers who specialize in what we do are rare. It's sort of a unicorn, or sort of a crossover of being a good programmer but understanding how audio works. And so sometimes it's a challenge to kind of get that working. That's why I started moving in audio programming, just to kind of solve some of those problems. So that can be frustrating on the technical side. On the creative side, it can be a challenge sometimes to keep when a game like Call of Duty, where everything needs to be at 10, and you have a variety of weapons that you're trying to make interesting. The challenge is kind of pushing back against the desire to key. The same thing happens in music, right? The loudness wars, like make everything is perceived as needing more bass or being bigger, or there's a ton of stuff going on. And to try and keep an interesting mix where there's a lot of contrast going on and a lot of dynamic range can be a challenge. Or it's oftentimes the designer, we're in a situation where, and I've had it happen to me, where they're in a war game where there's the artillery is blowing off a tornado is coming through, or you're standing next to a waterfall, or like these worst case scenarios where, with a ton of white noise, where it's just really difficult to create a compelling, non-fatiguing, interesting sound mix, when oftentimes the steer might be to make it bigger and louder, and everything has to be at 10. So that can be, diplomatically, it's a lot of process of trying to make everything sound unique and powerful, but distinctive and separated. So that can be a challenge.
But our role, as a, if you're sort of either an audio lead, which is, I guess, like a sound supervisor, or audio director, I think our role is to educate, the game director, the game directors, the design directors, the art directors, in kind of trying to explain, like, we cannot sustain that level of excitement, over a 20-hour game. So it is a challenge, but it's also our role to be able to talk to them and educate.
And there's definitely like a language and a definition of certain words to certain people element to that as well. As you mentioned, what does make it blue mean in terms of audio? I know I've worked for a couple of different audio directors, a couple of different creative directors who had very different definitions of what it meant to have something sound visceral. So to one, it may mean, oh, they want to hear more air movement. If there's like a big car crash, oh, I need it more visceral. Maybe they want to hear the cars coming at each other a little more. Same thing, if somebody says, oh, I want to hear it more visceral, maybe they want to hear more debris when the cars actually impact to make it sound like, oh, it was such a heavy crash, so much stuff flew off of it. And I think there's definitely that learning period when you're working with somebody new or somebody that, yeah, they're asking for something. Sometimes it can come across as, oh, they don't know what they want, but you could just ask, you can ask questions to try to narrow it down, what they may be looking for. You may present them. It's easy for us on the sound side to present multiple options of how things would sound in game, because we can always resort to a post sort of thing. We can take a capture of a video game and say, okay, does this car crash sound more visceral? Does this one sound more visceral? So, I mean, it's a little bit of a game of 20 questions. Is it bigger than a breadbasket? But as long as you see it as more an element of the communication and learning to work together, more so than somebody saying, I want this, I want that. There is that discovery period that you have to go through, and just keeping that in mind as you're doing that definitely helps ease any frustrations of, oh, I just can't give this person what they want. This is ridiculous.
I mean, I think it's a relationship in a lot of times with people. And you learn their language.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so let me open this up to you all, and raise a hand, and I will bring them up to you. Don't everybody raise your hand at once now, okay? So.
Hello, great presentation. I'm curious, I guess I would imagine that a lot of players are using headsets for these games. Are you guys mixing on headphones, or are you using an immersive speaker layout? What's your monitoring environment when you do your music?
Primarily, we mix to a surround sound format. Like on Spider-Man, when we were doing our final mix, yeah, we were primarily bouncing back and forth between 7.1 and 5.1 systems. We do account for different listener environments, different speaker types in some of the options that we include, like during the pause menus, during the options menus. I know for Spider-Man, we would always have an issue where once you put on a set of headphones with the way that the hardware would kind of downmix our game, all of a sudden things that on a surround sound system would normally be coming from behind you were coming through really loud in your headset, to the point that it was getting in the way of sounds that, as you're playing a game, are maybe more important to the player, stuff that's going on directly in front of them, except other than things that they just swung by in Spider-Man's case. So we try to work tech into our games where we're able to tell, okay, the player is now listening through headphones, or the player is now listening on their TV speakers, where we can manipulate sort of maybe the dynamic range through compression. We can go through and have, I think on Spider-Man, we actually had our core programmers figure out that, oh, okay, if it's being played back in stereo, we should take those two back channels and maybe drop them a couple of dB before they get blended in with everything else. So we do try to take as much into account as we can in that regard.
But it's not perfect, and I feel like we're still trying to kind of figure it out, and always kind of balance it with what we're trying to do in an ideal listening scenario versus what people are going to be listening to. And it's kind of like, well, you have to sometimes make decisions. And I think it's something that's going to be an ongoing process, and hopefully, maybe with new technology, we'll be able to do a better job to, just kind of like a custom, mix or custom master for each like setup.
There's a different, I tend, when I'm creating assets, to use headphones quite often, as I sort of like being that close to the sound. And there are headphones that you learn to trust and to kind of understand. So I go back and forth in the creation of sounds between speakers and headphones. In terms of when you're approaching that final mix stage, it's just like mixing music. It's a combination of having speakers in a tuned room that you trust so that you're hearing everything. I tend to also play games a lot with I'll find what the current number one choice is with players in terms of headphones. I think the Logitech G33, something like that, is what I use right now because it's very common. It's hard to account for every system that players may have, but I play games on that. I listen to the stuff I'm making on that because I know that a lot of players use that. Now, it varies from system to system. Sometimes you're working on games that are PC-based, and so you're accounting for what that player listening experience is. With consoles, it's usually a living room experience where anything goes. We used to try to understand how many players have 5.1 systems and what the user experience is, and it's broad and varied. So it's a best guess to just make sure, just like mixing music, that there's confidence that what we're creating is quality and will translate well to other systems. And like Jeff was saying, we often then try and set up, like we'd have for Call of Duty, a night mode where we knew that a lot of players were playing the game late, where they were keeping it down quiet so that the gunfire wasn't waking up their family. So we had a mix, that was special for that. So there's tricks we do to try and accommodate a lot of different play styles, but there are many. So.
Did you have another question? It's all good. So, anybody else up there? I know there's got to be some hands. Is this probably mostly audio? Are you film? Are you everything right now? Okay, great.
Hey, so with like the advent of like VR and AR starting to become more of a thing, how's that, I guess, whether changing workflow or the idea of like where sound's coming from, the volume levels, like how do you guys account for those aspects? Because like when you're immersed in a game via a screen, you're obviously somewhat separated from it, but once you're VR, you are the character, and now things are behind you. Whereas even if you're playing Call of Duty first person, you're still distanced by that screen. So now it's up right in your face. So how's that become whether a challenge or new fun discovery?
Yeah, definitely, it's something we're still learning and trying to figure out how to deal with. My experience, I've done a couple of VR games, and one of them we were basically doing development on a console, just like any other regular game. And then at some point there was a switch to VR, and it was a game called Bound. It was a game with like really large environments. So one thing that I noticed when immediately I kind of designed it to sound appropriately on the console. When we put a headset, and all of a sudden the distance, it just makes the environment so much bigger, and those sounds just started sounding super tiny and not appropriate for the size. So we had to redesign. We redesigned a couple of sounds, but also tuning attenuation curves, which is basically telling how loud you're gonna hear something, over distance when you start approaching something, is how, from how far you're gonna hear it, and then how loud it's gonna get as you approach something. So I ended up doing a lot of tweaking of that because it just didn't sound right. It just didn't sound in an environment when you're actually in.
It's VR and AR has done a lot to really help the technology to center in on on understanding occlusion obstruction, or like it's necessary in the VR world for it really to sound like some, that the magic that happens when the sound is happening behind your head. It's sort of a series of really delicate equations that the shape of your ear is creating to translate that message to your brain. And in the VR experience, when it's unnatural, you can't fake it. And in VR, it's also really easy without audio anchoring you. It's easy to get nauseous because your brain is having trouble already kind of understanding the world you're in. And when the sound isn't right, it's very difficult to kind of be in that space. So what we discovered is how important it is, and in AR too, to really try and understand where something else, when the sound is properly emanating from that particular area and traveling with it, it really helps the brain to accept that. So the necessity of audio behaving and responding in a way that it does in real life has really created an increase in programmers spending a lot of time on those equations of that simulation of sound moving through space. So it's very helpful because the back end, we're getting a lot more programmer time on making that sound very realistic. But it's an incredibly interesting place to play, and it does involve a lot of crafting an experience and then putting on the headset and having to be in there to really understand how these subtle changes. We're trained to expect this, and now we're simulating that world. Where in a game that's screen-based, we can fudge things. We can make a sound that maybe we need to bring out and make a linear fall off, an unnatural fall off, because we're trying to focus it or frame it a certain way. It's much harder to do that in VR because your brain is expecting a real experience. So it's a fun new challenge that's giving us a lot of new things to think about.
Just more sort of like a practical challenge that I've run into is how you mix, and how you basically work on a game where you have a headset on. You just realize all of a sudden it's like, I put a headset on, but now I can't see my computer screen, and it took me by surprise, believe it or not. And with the mixing, the same thing. Like how if you have few people in the room with the director, how do you mix that? So like one of the things we did basically was one person is driving playing the game with a headset. There would be another person doing adjustments on the go, like in a middleware, and then we all have like headphone. Everyone is on the headphones, but then we can hear each other as we're discussing. So we would actually mic the room and feed it back to our headphones so we can hear each other. So there's some of those like very practical challenges with that as well.
We have a great panel here with a lot of years of experience. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Dylan. Mike. So do you guys use like special programs to implement the audio into your game, or do you do that like go-to? Did I just answer the question?
Yeah, you've heard us mention middleware a few times, and it's sort of to be more specific with that, there's sort of that's the abstraction layer between us and the game itself. So the middleware, for example, Audio Connect Wise is a popular one, and it's basically like a DAW, but specific to us being able to craft sound patches that have some of those qualities that we've been talking about, where you can create a random container that has a variety of sounds, or set up certain behaviors so a sound responds to real-time parameters that the game is sending. So that middleware creates a spot where we can set up all our patches on all our sounds, and then that interfaces with the game engine itself. So that's one of them. Other than that, specific tools might be, when we're crafting sounds, we use the same, we're in digital audio workstations of various preferences, and so that's less specific to what we do. That's just more sort of the general craft. But the sounds all come together in the middleware, and sometimes in the engine itself. There are engines like Unreal is a popular game development engine that has a pretty robust sound engine and ways to manipulate the sounds and give them these qualities in the engine itself. So there are areas of the game engine where there's specific things that create the audio behaviors that we're looking for.
Other questions? Oh, thank you.
So you often hear about how the game development world is like pretty brutal on the programmer type people and the software development side. What is that kind of work and work-life balance for the audio side?
Really hard.
We have something called crunch in our industry. The last 3 months of a game development cycle is usually the death march. I feel like every studio in the world is trying to get rid of that now, but it's just sort of inherent to what we do, and having a deadline and having 200 people touch the same thing and trying to get it all out the door on time.
It's, yeah, you know, when I started, like just working on music and creating sounds, I was happy to do it 20 hours a day. And, you know, that's basically what we did. We'd work on the game. I just was constantly working on it. And I think we all were. The video game industry is still relatively young, but we're maturing now. I think we got to the point where that was, because we love what we do, where it's easy to do it because you love it for extended hours. But it became a real problem. It can be a challenge with creativity to ever feel like something's done. When you're writing a song or working on something artistic, it's difficult to know when to stop. It can always be better. And so sometimes we're driven by our own desire to make something better and to spend more time on something. But it's also a real challenge, especially in audio. There's a bottleneck because we're a small team that touches has been said, we touch everything in the game. And so towards the end of a project, when all of the other departments are pushing to get their final changes in, we have to react to those changes, and the bottleneck occurs. And so it is a challenge for every studio, and every studio I've worked with. The positive side is we recognize it. I think every studio is trying to do their best to make sure that it's not just an endemic death march, and that there are points where we're all, you know, working really hard to get something done. And hopefully, we're as an industry moving towards recognizing that work-life balance is incredibly important. We're more creative when we're well rested. And you can be, you know, in order to keep your energy and passion of what you're doing, you do need to take breaks and have a properly scoped path and a rested developer. So, you know, it continues. You'll continue to hear the horror stories of this, or the end phases of development where everyone's really just trying to get it done and things happen. But there'll always be the follow-up too of like trying to be better at it. So it's a challenge, and it's a problem that's continually being trying to solve.
But one of the roles that, you know, like audio leads or audio directors have is to try to plan ahead and just try to mitigate it, or minimize it at least to a manageable amount. So you know, we do a lot of, you know, planning and, you know, working with producers to, you know, make sure we have enough people working on things. And if we don't, we just need to be really vocal about asking for help and making sure we have enough staffing. So yeah, that's, you know, kind of, it's also kind of on us to you know, to ask for it and to ask for help if needed.
Okay, I would love to ask some more questions, but we do need to wrap it up. I would like everybody to give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you all for being here and for explaining your roles and talking about your passions. If anybody has any lingering questions that they haven't addressed, please feel free to address them on the way out. Thank you all.
Thank you, Karen, for bringing this time together.
Thanks to everyone for being very patient, very understanding for our technical difficulties. You're all great.